I always believed that being a grandmother would be one of life's greatest blessings. For years, I imagined what it would be like to hold my granddaughter in my arms, see her first steps, hear her first words, and build with her that special relationship that only grandmothers and grandchildren can have. My name is Margaret. I'm 62 years old, and throughout my life I've worked hard as a nurse in a public hospital here in the East Zone of São Paulo. I raised my daughter Rachel practically alone after my husband left us when she was only 3 years old. They were difficult times, but I never let the difficulties prevent me from giving the best to my girl. Rachel grew up, graduated in education, married a wonderful man named Andre, and 7 years ago gave me the most precious gift I could receive, my granddaughter Jasmine. From the moment I first saw Jasmine at the hospital, with those curious little eyes and that strong cry that seemed to announce her striking personality, I knew my life had gained a new purpose. The first years were magical. I went to Rachel's house every weekend, helped with the baby, changed diapers, gave baths, rocked her to sleep. Jasmine became my reason to wake up every day with a smile on my face. When she started to talk, one of the first words she said was, "Grandma," and I swear I felt my heart almost explode with happiness. I kept that moment as a treasure in my memory, and during the following years, we built such a beautiful relationship that everyone around us commented on it. Jasmine spent afternoons with me. I taught her little things about life. We made cookies together. She helped me water the plants in my small garden, and we spent hours drawing and coloring at the kitchen table. But then, about 6 months ago, something changed. At first, they were small signs that I tried to ignore, believing they were just normal phases of a child's growth. Jasmine had just turned 7 and was in 2nd grade. I imagined that perhaps she was just busier with school, with new friends, with extracurricular activities. But what started as small signs soon transformed into a reality that broke my heart every day. Jasmine had started avoiding me in a way I had never experienced before. I remember perfectly the first moment I realized something was wrong. It was on a sunny Saturday in July, one of those perfect days to spend time with family. I had prepared the carrot cake that Jasmine always loved, the one with chocolate frosting that she said was the best in the whole world. I arrived at Rachel's house excited, carrying the still warm cake in a pan covered with a flowered dish towel. Rachel opened the door with a smile, but I noticed a shadow of concern in her eyes that she tried to quickly disguise. We entered the living room, and that's when I saw Jasmine sitting on the sofa, watching television. I called her with that affectionate voice I always used with her, that tone full of love that grandmothers reserve for their grandchildren. But to my complete surprise, Jasmine barely looked in my direction. She murmured an almost inaudible "hi" and continued looking fixedly at the television screen, as if I were just any visitor, not the grandmother she used to receive with tight hugs and wet kisses on the face. In that moment, I tried not to show how much that hurt me. I sat down next to her on the sofa, tried to talk about school, about her favorite cartoons, about the cake I had made especially for her. But all my attempts were met with monosyllabic responses, with that distant behavior that left me completely lost. After a few uncomfortable minutes, Jasmine simply got up and said she was going to play in her room. Rachel tried to intervene, asking her to stay a bit with Grandma, but Jasmine just shook her head and disappeared down the hallway. I stayed there sitting, looking at the empty space beside me, feeling a tightness in my chest that I couldn't explain. Rachel approached and sat where Jasmine had been seconds before. She took my hand and squeezed it affectionately, but I could see that she was also confused by her daughter's behavior. We talked for a few minutes, and Rachel assured me it wasn't anything I had done, that Jasmine was just going through a complicated phase at school, that there were some situations with classmates that were making her more closed off and sensitive. I wanted to believe those words. I really did. But deep in my heart, something told me there was more to that story than just school problems. The following weeks were even worse. Each visit to Rachel's house became a painful experience. Jasmine always found an excuse not to be near me. If I entered the living room, she went to her room. If I tried to help her with homework, she said she preferred to do it alone. In the rare moments when we were in the same environment, she avoided looking directly at me, maintained an evident physical distance, and her body seemed tense, as if my presence made her uncomfortable. That was destroying me inside in a way I never imagined possible. I started losing sleep, spending entire nights awake, trying to understand what had happened. I turned over every memory of recent months, looking for some moment when I might have said or done something that had hurt her. Had I been too harsh on some occasion? Had I repressed her in some way? Had I made some comment that she misinterpreted? The questions multiplied in my head like an endless storm, and the more I thought, the fewer answers I found. I talked with Rachel countless times, trying to find out if she knew anything, if Jasmine had mentioned anything, but my daughter seemed as lost as I was. And if you're following this story and identifying with this pain of not understanding what's going on with someone we love, leave your comment down below telling your experience, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss the next chapters of this story that will still reveal truths that will leave you speechless. During this terrible period, I also started distancing myself. Not because I wanted to, but because each visit, each failed attempt to connect with Jasmine left me so emotionally exhausted that I needed days to recover. My routine of weekly visits transformed into bi-weekly visits, and then into monthly visits. Rachel tried to convince me to keep coming, assuring me that Jasmine would eventually overcome that phase, but I no longer had the strength to face that constant rejection. In over 40 years working as a nurse, I had dealt with extremely difficult situations, had seen suffering and pain in all possible forms, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the pain of being rejected by my own granddaughter. My health began to be affected. I developed sleep problems, had to start taking anxiety medication, and my blood pressure, which had always been controlled, began showing concerning spikes. My work colleagues noticed the change in my behavior, and my best friend, Joyce, who is also a nurse and has worked with me for over 20 years, started questioning me about what was happening. During a coffee break on a particularly difficult day, sitting in the small hospital break room, I finally broke down and told her everything. Joyce listened to me with her characteristic patience, without interrupting me, just holding my hand while tears ran down my face. When I finished telling everything, she was silent for a few seconds, as if processing everything she had heard. Then she told me something that stuck in my mind. Children often cannot express with words what they're feeling, especially when it's about something that scares or confuses them. She suggested that perhaps Jasmine was going through something she didn't know how to communicate, and that her behavior toward me could be just a reflection of something much bigger and more complex than I imagined. Those words from Joyce planted a seed of hope in my heart, but also left me even more worried. If Jasmine was going through something difficult, something she couldn't express, I needed to find out what it was. I needed to find a way to reach her, to show that I was there to support her no matter what was happening. But how to do that when she didn't even want to be in the same room as me? That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I decided I needed to have a serious conversation with Rachel and Andre, not just a superficial conversation like we had had until then, but a deep and honest conversation about what was really happening with Jasmine. I scheduled a dinner at my house on a Friday night, when Jasmine would be at her other grandmother's house, Andre's mother. I prepared the meal carefully, cooking Rachel's favorite dishes, trying to create a welcoming environment where we could talk openly. When they arrived, Rachel immediately realized this wasn't just a casual dinner night. She knew me too well not to notice the tension on my face, the determination in my eyes. We sat at the table, had the initial meals trying to maintain light conversation, but when we finished eating and went to the living room with coffee and dessert, I finally addressed the subject that had brought me to the brink of despair in recent months. I told them, with my voice choked with emotion, how much I was suffering from Jasmine's distancing. I said I couldn't stand pretending everything was fine anymore, that this situation was making me physically and emotionally ill. I begged them to be honest with me, to tell me if there was something I had done, something I could correct or at least try to fix. Rachel and Andre exchanged a look between themselves, one of those looks that couples exchange when they share a secret or a concern. That's when Andre, who had always been a man of few words but very observant, finally spoke. He told me that he had also noticed changes in Jasmine's behavior, not just toward me, but in general. She was quieter, more withdrawn, spent more time alone in her room drawing than playing as she used to. They had tried to talk to her several times, but Jasmine always deflected from the subject or simply said everything was fine. Rachel added that Jasmine's teacher had mentioned in a recent meeting that she noticed the girl more isolated during breaks, preferring to stay alone drawing in her notebook instead of playing with classmates in the yard. Those revelations made me even more worried. It wasn't just with me then, it was something bigger, something that was affecting all aspects of Jasmine's life. Rachel then told me something that made me freeze. The previous week, she had found a notebook hidden under Jasmine's mattress, a notebook full of drawings that left her extremely disturbed. She hadn't fully understood the meaning of those drawings, but something about them deeply bothered her. Rachel had kept the notebook, not really knowing what to do with that discovery. I immediately asked to see the notebook. Rachel hesitated for a moment, but then Andre went to the car and came back with a small pink backpack, one of those with cartoon characters, and from inside it, he took out a hardcover blue notebook, a bit wrinkled at the edges. When Rachel placed that notebook in my hands, I felt as if I were holding something sacred and at the same time terrifying, as if I were about to discover a secret that would change everything. With trembling hands, I opened the notebook. The first pages were normal children's drawings, flowers, houses, rainbows, the family, all very colorful and cheerful. But as I turned the pages, the drawings began to change. The vibrant colors gave way to darker tones, the happy lines transformed into heavier and more confused strokes. And then, on a specific page, I saw something that made my heart almost stop. It was a drawing of a black girl, clearly Jasmine by the way she always drew her own curly hair. But in this drawing, the girl was crying, with enormous tears running down her face. Around her, there were several other children, and they all had speech balloons coming from their mouths. Jasmine had written words inside those balloons, words that made me feel instant nausea. Your hair is ugly. You're different. Nobody wants to play with you. Go back to your country. My eyes filled with tears as I processed what I was seeing. My 7-year-old granddaughter was being a victim of racism at school, but there was more. I turned to the next page and saw another drawing that broke my heart in an even deeper way. It was Jasmine again, but this time she was drawn next to another person. This person was drawn in a larger size, clearly an adult figure, and I immediately recognized by the drawing's details that it was me. The representation was clear. I was wearing my favorite necklace that I always wear, that pearl one my mother gave me, and the floral dress I wear frequently. But what shocked me was the expression Jasmine had drawn on my face and the speech balloons coming from my mouth. In the drawing, I was saying things that never in my life would I say, but that apparently Jasmine believed I thought, your hair should be straight. You need to be more delicate. Pretty girls aren't like this. Next to my character, there were small notes that Jasmine had made, and as I read them, I began to understand the dimension of the misunderstanding that had settled in my granddaughter's mind. She had written, Grandma always fixes my hair, but I heard her say it's a lot of work. Grandma always wants me to wear dresses, but I like to play in the dirt. Grandma looks at my hair with that face. Grandma doesn't like me this way. My God, what had happened? How had my granddaughter completely misinterpreted my actions and words so wrong? I started crying uncontrollably right there, in my living room, holding that notebook as if it were proof of a tragedy I myself had caused without realizing. Rachel approached and hugged me, also crying, and Andre stood there, hand on his forehead, clearly as shocked as we were with those revelations. For several minutes, we stayed there, processing the gravity of what we had just discovered. When I finally managed to compose myself enough to speak, I began to remember the situations Jasmine had mentioned in the drawings. Yes, I always fixed her hair when she came to visit me. I loved combing her curls, making braids, putting colorful bows. And yes, once I had commented to Rachel, without realizing Jasmine was nearby, that taking care of her curls was work, but I meant it was work of love, that I adored every minute taking care of that beautiful hair. But Jasmine must have heard only, "It's a lot of work," and interpreted it as something negative. And the dresses, yes, I always brought dresses for her because I myself love dresses, and I thought she looked beautiful in them. But never was it my intention to make her feel obligated to wear them, or that I didn't approve when she wanted to play and get dirty. And as for the look she mentioned, she was probably referring to the moments when I observed her curls with attention, marveled at how beautiful they were, thinking about how she was a beautiful girl, but she interpreted that look as disapproval. And then everything began to make sense in a devastating way. Jasmine was being a victim of racist bullying at school, was receiving constant messages that her hair was ugly, that she was different, that there was something wrong with her. And in that vulnerable state, she began to interpret every action and word of mine through that distorted lens. She began to believe that even her grandmother, someone she thought loved her unconditionally, agreed with those cruel children at school. Rachel then told me something she had never mentioned before. A few weeks ago, Jasmine had come home crying, saying she wanted to straighten her hair, that she couldn't stand having curly hair anymore. When Rachel asked why, Jasmine said that even Grandma thought her hair was too much work, and that it would be better if it were different. It was in that moment that Rachel began to suspect something was very wrong, but she didn't know I was being associated with the cruel comments Jasmine was receiving at school. I spent the rest of that night talking with Rachel and Andre about what we needed to do. It became clear that there were two issues that needed to be addressed urgently: the bullying Jasmine was suffering at school and the misunderstanding about my feelings toward her. We decided that the next day we would go together to talk with the school administration about the bullying, and that I would have a very serious and deep conversation with Jasmine to clarify everything. That night I couldn't sleep a single minute. I lay in bed, looking at the ceiling, thinking about how I had failed so completely in communicating my love to my granddaughter. I thought about all the conversations we could have had, about all the times I could have been clearer about my feelings, about all the lost opportunities to validate her beauty exactly as she was. And you who are following this story, leave your like here if you believe in the importance of talking openly with our children about self-love, about identity, about the beauty that exists in our diversity, and keep watching, because the conversation I had with Jasmine will deeply move you. The next day was Saturday, and Rachel called Andre's mother, saying they needed to pick up Jasmine earlier. When they came back home with her, I was already there waiting. Jasmine got out of the car, and upon seeing me, her face immediately changed. She looked down and began to head quickly into the house, but Rachel gently held her by the shoulder and said we needed to talk, all together. We entered the living room, and Rachel asked Jasmine to sit on the sofa. I sat next to her, but maintained a respectful distance, not wanting to invade her or make her feel pressured. Andre and Rachel sat in the chairs in front of us. The silence in the room was heavy, loaded with tension and unspoken emotions. It was Rachel who started the conversation, explaining to Jasmine that they had found her notebook of drawings and that they were very worried about what they saw there. Jasmine's face went pale, and tears immediately began to well up in her eyes. She started apologizing repeatedly, saying she didn't want anyone to see those drawings, that they were private. Rachel reassured her, saying she wasn't angry, but that she needed to understand what was happening. Then, gently, Rachel asked about the drawings of the other children saying bad things to her at school. It was as if a dam had broken. Jasmine started crying copiously, and between sobs, told everything. She told about how a group of girls in her class had started making comments about her hair right at the beginning of the school year. At first, they were comments that seemed innocent, like, "Your hair is different." But then they became more cruel, They said her hair looked like a broom, that it looked like steel wool, that it looked like she had stuck her finger in an electrical outlet. They made these comments in front of other classmates, laughing, turning the moment into a spectacle of humiliation. Jasmine told us she tried to ignore it at first, as the teacher always said to do when someone bothered her, but the comments only got worse. The girls started saying that nobody wanted to play with her because she was different, because she wasn't like them. One of them even said Jasmine should go back to Africa, even though Jasmine was born and had always lived here in Brazil. My granddaughter, at only 7 years old, was being subjected to cruel and systematic racism, and we, her family, had no idea what was happening. But then came the part that concerned me directly. With a trembling voice, Jasmine looked at me for the first time in months, really looked into my eyes, and said something that made me feel as if my heart was being crushed. I thought Grandma agreed with them. She explained, through tears, how she had interpreted my comments and actions, how she had heard when I said taking care of her hair was work and thought I thought it was a burden, how she noticed I always brought dresses for her to wear and thought I wanted her to be more feminine, more delicate, more different than she really was, how she noticed my lingering looks at her hair and thought I was judging, criticizing, disapproving. And worst of all, she said that once she heard me talking to a friend on the phone, saying something about how Jasmine's curls are difficult to manage. That conversation really happened. I remember perfectly. I was talking to my friend Joyce about products for curly hair because I wanted to learn to better care for Jasmine's curls. I was saying the curls were difficult to manage because I didn't have experience with that type of hair, not because I thought there was anything wrong with them. But Jasmine, who was going through that trauma at school, heard only difficult to manage and associated it with the criticisms she received daily. My heart was shattered. I approached Jasmine and, with her permission, took her hands. I looked deeply into her eyes, those beautiful eyes I had first seen at the hospital 7 years ago, and began to speak. I told her, with all the sincerity of my heart, that I never thought there was anything wrong with her or with her hair. I explained that when I said taking care of her curls was work, I meant it was beautiful work, work of love, something I loved to do because every moment with her was precious to me. I explained about the dresses, about how I simply wanted to share with her something I love, but that she never needed to wear dresses if she didn't want to, that she was perfect exactly as she was, playing in the dirt, running, jumping, being exactly the free and happy child she should be. And about the looks, I explained that I looked at her hair with admiration, with fascination, because I thought her curls were absolutely beautiful, because I saw in her a beauty I considered extraordinary. Then I did something I should have done long ago. I told Jasmine about my own story, about how I grew up in a time when being a black woman was even more challenging than it is today, about how I also faced racist comments and discrimination, about how I learned to love my own skin and my own features only when I was already an adult, and about how I wanted her never to have to go through what I went through. I told her that my intention was always to celebrate her beauty, never to change her or mold her into something different. And then, with tears running down my face, I said something I should have said many more times, something I thought she knew but clearly needed to hear. Jasmine, you are absolutely beautiful exactly as you are. Your hair is beautiful. Your skin is beautiful. Everything about you is perfect, and I wouldn't change anything about you. Those girls at school are wrong, completely wrong, and they say those things because they're jealous of your beauty, of your light, of the incredible person you are. And I'm sorry, really sorry, for not being clear enough about this, for letting you think, even for a second, that I agreed with those cruel girls. Jasmine looked at me for a long moment, as if processing everything I had just said. And then, slowly, she threw herself into my arms and started crying, but this time it was a different cry, a cry of relief, of release. I hugged her with all the strength I had, feeling as if I were holding the most precious thing in the universe. Rachel and Andre were also crying, and soon we were all hugging there in the living room, crying together, but also beginning to heal together. In that moment, I made a promise to myself and to Jasmine. I would be more intentional with my words, clearer about my feelings, more present not just physically but emotionally. And most importantly, I would help her build the self-esteem and self-love she needed to face a world that wouldn't always be kind to her. But our conversation that afternoon didn't end there. We needed to address what was happening at school, and we needed to act quickly. Andre suggested that early Monday, we would all go together to speak with the school's pedagogical administration about the bullying Jasmine was facing. Rachel agreed and said she had already researched Brazilian legislation against racism and discrimination, and that the school had a legal obligation to act against that type of behavior. On Sunday, I spent the entire day with Jasmine. We went to the park, ate ice cream, and for the first time in months, she was again that cheerful and talkative girl I knew. We spent hours talking about everything, from her favorite cartoons to deeper things about identity, belonging, and self-acceptance. I went to a specialized bookstore and bought several children's books with Black protagonists, books that celebrated the beauty of Blackness, books that showed princesses, scientists, adventurers, all with dark skin and curly or kinky hair. When I gave these books to Jasmine, her eyes sparkled in a way I hadn't seen in months. On Monday morning, Rachel, Andre, Jasmine, and I went to the school. We requested an emergency meeting with the pedagogical coordinator, Diana, a woman who appeared to be about 40 years old and who received us with an expression that mixed concern and defensiveness. We sat in her office, and Rachel began to explain, in a calm but firm manner, what was happening with Jasmine. Diana listened to everything attentively, but I could see on her face that she was trying to minimize the situation. She started with that speech that so many institutions use when they don't want to assume responsibility. Children are cruel to each other. They're just children's games. We need to teach Jasmine to be more resilient. But before Rachel could respond, I leaned forward and looked directly at Diana. I told her, with all the firmness that my 62 years and 40 years of profession gave me, that what was happening weren't children's games, but racism, discrimination, systematic bullying. I said the school had not just a moral obligation, but a legal obligation to protect my granddaughter and all other Black children who studied there. I mentioned Law 10/639, which makes teaching Afro-Brazilian history and culture mandatory in schools, and asked what measures the school was taking to comply with this law and to create a truly inclusive and respectful environment. Diana's posture changed completely. She realized she wasn't dealing with a family that would accept empty excuses or promises without action. She picked up a notebook and began writing down everything we were saying. She promised she would open an immediate investigation into the reported incidents, that she would talk individually with the children involved and their parents, and that she would implement an anti-racist education program for all school classes. Andre then suggested that the school also hire a school psychologist specialized in racial issues to work not just with Jasmine, but with all the children, helping to create an environment of true respect and acceptance of diversity. Diana agreed and said she would take the suggestion to the school administration. We also agreed that there would be a weekly follow-up on Jasmine's situation and that any new incident would be immediately communicated to us. Before leaving the office, Jasmine, who had been quiet during the entire meeting, asked to speak. With a small but firm voice, she said, "I just want the other girls to understand that there's nothing wrong with my hair, and that they don't have the right to make me feel bad because of how I am." Diana was visibly moved by Jasmine's words and promised she would do everything in her power to make sure that happened. The following weeks were transformative. The school really took the situation seriously, implementing monthly workshops on diversity, racism, and respect. The girls who had participated in the bullying were called, along with their parents, for individual conversations where they were educated about the impact of their words and actions. Some of the families really embraced the opportunity to educate their daughters, while others were more resistant. But the school made it clear that any discriminatory behavior would result in serious consequences. Jasmine began attending sessions with a psychologist specialized in racial issues and child self-esteem. In these sessions, she learned tools to deal with racist comments, learned about the rich and beautiful history of her ancestors, and began to develop an emotional armor that would protect her from the cruel words she would inevitably still face throughout life. Because unfortunately, racism doesn't disappear overnight. And as for Jasmine and me, our relationship was not only restored, but became even deeper and more meaningful. I started taking Jasmine to Afro-Brazilian cultural events, to museums that celebrated the history and achievements of Black people, to meetings with other Black women and girls where she could see herself represented and celebrated. I learned to do more elaborate Afro hairstyles, watched dozens of tutorial videos about caring for curly and kinky hair, and transformed our moments of hair care into rituals of love and celebration. I also changed the way I talked about her and about us. I began to use words like beautiful, powerful, strong, proud when referring to her curls and her identity. I began to tell stories about incredible Black women in history, from African queens to contemporary activists, ensuring Jasmine grew up knowing she came from a lineage of strength, intelligence, and beauty. Rachel and Andre also made changes at home. They filled Jasmine's house with Black dolls, books with Black protagonists, movies and cartoons with representation. They began having open conversations about race and racism, not waiting for Jasmine to come to them with problems, but proactively equipping her with the knowledge and confidence she would need to navigate a world that wouldn't always be fair or kind. 3 months after that transformative Saturday, Jasmine had a school project where she needed to do a presentation about someone she admired. She chose to do it about me. When Rachel told me, I was surprised and moved. On the day of the presentation, I went to the school to watch. Jasmine stood in front of the class, holding poster boards with photos and drawings, and talked about how her grandmother had worked as a nurse for over 40 years, helping people, saving lives, being strong even when things were difficult. But what really made me cry was when she finished her presentation saying, "And the most important thing my grandmother taught me is that I'm beautiful exactly as I am, that my hair is beautiful, that my skin is beautiful, and that I should never let anyone make me feel small. She taught me that being different is being special, and that I should always be proud of who I am." In that moment, looking at my granddaughter, speaking with so much confidence and pride in front of her classmates, including those girls who had bullied her, I knew we had achieved something precious. We had helped build in her a foundation of self-love that no one could destroy. And if you've made it this far in this story, please leave your comment telling if you've been through something similar, whether as a grandmother, mother, father, or even as the child who suffered bullying. Leave your like if this story touched you, subscribe to the channel for more stories that will make you reflect on family, love, and the importance of really listening to and seeing the people we love. And activate the bell so you don't miss any updates, because sharing these stories is important so that more families can avoid the suffering that almost destroyed our relationship. Today, 6 months after that revealing drawing, my relationship with Jasmine is stronger than ever. She's back to spending every weekend with me, and our moments together are filled with laughter, deep conversations, and lots of love. She still draws, but now her drawings are different. She draws herself as a warrior princess, with a crown of flowers in her curly hair, with a sword in her hand, strong and proud. She draws our whole family together, always smiling, always with lots of explicit love in the characters' expressions. The school also changed. After our intervention, other Black families started speaking out about similar experiences their children had faced. This led to a deeper transformation in the school's culture. Today, there are regular celebrations of diversity. The curriculum was expanded to include much more content about Afro-Brazilian history and culture, and there is a declared zero tolerance for any type of bullying or discrimination. The girls who bullied Jasmine also changed. Some of them, after conversations with their parents and the school, really understood the mistake they made and approached Jasmine to apologize. One of them, Sarah, even became one of Jasmine's best friends. Sarah once told me, when she came to my house for an afternoon of play with Jasmine, that she had asked her mother to teach her how to braid so she could do Jasmine's hair because she thought her friend's hair was the most beautiful in school. Seeing that transformation, seeing how education and exposure can change even the youngest hearts, gave me hope for the future. I learned many valuable lessons from this painful experience. I learned that it's not enough to love someone. We also need to communicate that love in ways the other person can receive and understand. I learned that children are always listening, always watching, always interpreting our words and actions, and that we need to be extremely intentional about the messages we send. I learned that racism is insidious, that it infiltrates the most unexpected places, and that fighting it requires constant vigilance and deliberate action. But above all, I learned that it's never too late to correct a misunderstanding, to rebuild a broken bridge, to restore a damaged relationship. If I hadn't persisted, if I hadn't insisted on discovering what was causing Jasmine's distancing, we could have lost precious years together. That drawing, that notebook hidden under the mattress, was a gift in disguise, an opportunity to face difficult truths and emerge stronger on the other side. Today, when I look at Jasmine, I see a confident girl who knows who she is, who values her identity, who isn't afraid to be different. I see a girl who learned, perhaps earlier than she should have, about the realities of racism, but who also learned that she's not alone, that she has a family that loves and protects her, that she has a community that celebrates her. And that, for me, is everything. Sometimes I find myself thinking about what would have happened if we hadn't discovered that notebook, if Rachel hadn't found those drawings. We could have continued for years without understanding Jasmine's suffering, without addressing the bullying she faced, without correcting the misunderstandings that were poisoning our relationship. But the universe, or fate, or simply Rachel's maternal concern gave us that opportunity for change, and we are eternally grateful for it. To all the grandmothers, mothers, fathers, aunts, uncles who are reading or hearing this story, I beg you, pay attention to your children. Not just to what they say, but to what they don't say. Observe changes in behavior, in mood, in sleep and eating patterns. Create safe spaces where they can express their fears and concerns without judgment. And most importantly, be explicit about your love, about your acceptance, about how much you value each unique aspect of them. And to the children who might be watching or hearing this with their families, if you're going through something difficult, if someone is hurting you with words or actions, if you're feeling bad about who you are, please tell a trusted adult. That fear you feel that no one will believe you or that no one will care, it's lying to you. The people who love you will always, always care, and will always, always want to help you. You don't need to carry that weight alone. As for schools and educators, this story is a reminder that you have a crucial role not just in educating academically, but in creating safe and inclusive environments where all children can thrive. Racist bullying is not a phase, it's not children's games, and it shouldn't be tolerated under any circumstances. Implement clear policies, educate proactively about diversity and respect, and always, always be ready to believe and act when a child or family reports discrimination. My life changed completely since that day I saw Jasmine's drawing. It changed because I was forced to face uncomfortable truths about how my actions and words were being interpreted. It changed because I learned that love needs to be active, intentional, explicit. It changed because I saw firsthand the devastating impact racism can have on a child of only 7 years old. And it changed because I experienced the indescribable joy of restoring a relationship I thought I had lost forever. Today, when Jasmine spends weekends with me, we have a new ritual. Every night before sleeping, we sit together and I tell her 3 things I love about her specifically that day. It can be something she said, something she did, or simply something about who she is. And then she does the same with me. It's a small ritual that doesn't take more than a few minutes, but that ensures we both end the day knowing without any doubt how much we are loved and valued. And when I care for her hair, applying products, gently detangling, making braids or buns or leaving the curls loose and free. I always say out loud how beautiful I think those curls are, how special they are, how they are part of the unique beauty that is my granddaughter. I transformed those moments, which she once interpreted as critical and negative, into explicit celebrations of her beauty and identity. I know Jasmine will still face challenges ahead. Racism hasn't disappeared, and she will certainly encounter other people throughout life who will try to make her feel smaller, different, inadequate. But now she has tools she didn't have before. She has confidence, has knowledge about her history and her culture, has a family that actively equips her to face the world, and, most importantly, she has an unshakable foundation of self-love that we built together. That notebook with those drawings is kept in a special box at my house. I didn't keep it to remember the pain, but to remember the transformation. To remember what we almost lost and what we managed to recover. To remember that misunderstandings can happen even in the most loving families, but that with honest communication, empathy, and willingness to change, we can overcome almost any obstacle. And so this story that began with suffering, with rejection, with misunderstandings and pain, ends with love, with understanding, with a grandmother-granddaughter relationship stronger than it ever was. It ends with a girl who knows who she is and is proud of it. It ends with a grandmother who learned to be better, to communicate better, to love better. It ends with a family that faced one of the most difficult challenges it could face and emerged not just intact, but deeply transformed for the better. So to conclude, I want to ask all of you who watched or read this story to the end. Share it. Share it with other families, with other grandmothers, with other children. Share it because stories like these need to be told, need to be heard, need to be learned. Leave your comment, telling your own experiences. Leave your, like if this story touched your heart. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that make us reflect on family, love, identity, and the challenges we face in this complex world. And activate the bell, because each notification is an opportunity to learn something new, to connect with other people going through similar experiences, to be part of a community that believes in the transformative power of empathy and understanding. My granddaughter doesn't avoid me anymore. On the contrary, she seeks me out, hugs me, tells me her secrets, her dreams, her fears. She knows, without any doubt, that her grandmother loves her exactly as she is, and that drawing that revealed the pain also revealed an opportunity, a chance to do better, to be better, to create a legacy of unconditional love and acceptance that Jasmine will be able to pass on to her own daughters one day. And that, in the end, is all a grandmother could hope for.